Etymology and historical origin of the baby name Eddie. Eddie is the pet form of Edward. The name Edward is one of the oldest English given names of Saxon origin and thus dates back to before the Norman Conquest, 1066. The Norman Conquest brought about a radical change in naming practices in England, and many of the old Saxon and Celtic names quickly fell out of fashion. Names like Cuthbert, Ethelred, and Beowulf disappeared. But there are a few survivors, such as Alfred, Edgar, and Harold. Edward, originally Edward in Old England, is probably the most successful, most enduring, and most widely used of them all. Edward comes from the Old English words ead meaning prosperity, riches, and werd meaning guard, so the name essentially means guard of riches. The name has been borne by several English kings, most notably Edward the Confessor, who was the last reigning king before the Norman Conquest and known for his fairness and piety. The endurance of the names used post-Normans probably had a lot to do with the universal appeal of this Edward. The Normans admired him, too. Aside from Edward, Eddie could also be considered a short form of Edmund, Edgar, or Edwin, or any masculine name starting with Ed. Eddie has long been an independently given name in its own right and interestingly is a top 100 choice in Sweden today. Personality of the boy name Eddie. The number 9 personality represents the completion or ending of the cycle and a need for perfection. This is the personality that moves from self to a greater understanding and compassion for the human condition and the world order. They want to make the world a better place. 9s are capable of great spiritual and humanitarian achievements. They are courageous and fearless, able to fight great battles on behalf of worthy causes. These personalities will not tolerate injustice. They are compassionate people with a strong sensitivity to others. They are able to both educate and inspire. Friendships and relationships are the lifeblood to the 9, and they place a high value on love and affection. 9s are often exceptionally gifted artistically, and they have a keen imagination and enterprising mind. Popularity of the boy name Eddie. Surprisingly, Eddie has maintained a position on the American male naming charts since the U.S. government first began tracking naming trends in 1880. Not only that, but at the turn of the 20th century in 1900 Eddie was ranked at number 63 on the charts, much more popular than we would have guessed for a name that is essentially a nickname. Eddie has been on the top 100 list, or else hovering very close to it, for a remarkable 90-plus years. The height of the name's popularity was in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and then again mid-century. As the latter half of the 20th century progressed, Eddie went into a slow and steady decline. In fact, it's right now that Eddie is experiencing his lowest rankings in history. Edward, and even Edwin and Edgar, are more popular than Eddie. Eddie is indeed a fun, happy and youthful name, but it does sound better as a nickname. Full names like Edward provide more flexibility in terms of naming preference for your child later in life. The regal full name Edward versus the simple, straightforward Ed or the boyishly handsome Eddie. In fact, all Eddies who may be familiar to you, Eddie Van Halen, Eddie Vedder, and Eddie Murphy, were all born Edward. Quick facts on Eddie. Gender, boy. Origin, English. Number of syllables, 2. Ranking popularity, 604. Pronunciation, EDEE. Simple meaning, guard of riches, protector of wealth. Characteristics of Eddie. Independent, philanthropy, perfection, intuitive, oneness, idealistic, multi-talented. Cultural references to the baby name Eddie. Literary characters of the baby name Eddie. Eddie Willers is a character in Ayn Rand's 1957 novel, Atlas Shrugged. Eddie is a childhood friend of Dagny Taggart. His father and grandfather worked for her family at Taggart Transcontinental, and so does Eddie. His loyalty is unquestioned and unquestioning. He also harbors a secret love for Dagny. Perhaps Eddie's greatest attraction is the very common stature of his character. He is a good and decent man among superstars, some good, some not so very. Eddie Everyman has our perspective on the world, and wants what we all want, that evil be punished and that good be rewarded. He opens the book and introduces us to the framework within which we will travel, and he ends the book, demonstrating what happens to the common man left behind at the denouement of this great mystery. Too late does he realize the real order of things in his crumbling world, and too late also how misplaced his honest and clean loyalties have been. And it appears, at the close of the day, that his ideals and his moral courage will die with him. Eddie Carbone is the protagonist of Arthur Miller's play, A View from the Bridge, first performed in 1955, and inspiring later adaptations to film, television and opera. Eddie is a hardworking New York longshoreman living with his wife and his orphaned teenaged niece, Catherine, for whom he develops an unhealthy, protective passion. His wife's two cousins, Marco and Rodolfo, arrive from Italy illegally, and one of them begins a relationship with Catherine, prompting Eddie to point out the young man's shortcomings at every turn. Knowing that he has the power to stop their romance by reporting the young suitor, Rodolfo, Eddie struggles with his conscience and, initially, wins the battle. When he finds out that they are to marry, however, Eddie goes to the immigration authorities, resulting in a raid on their apartment. Catherine and Rodolfo's marriage assures Rodolfo's stay in the United States, but Eddie, mad with jealousy and denial, refuses Rodolfo's offer of reconciliation, charges into a duel with Marco, and dies in the street, calling out his wife's name with his final breath. We can only hope that that final word of his leads to his redemption, for he has stubbornly refused to see all along how his unholy obsession would ultimately lead to such terrible betrayal of so many. Eddie may be a common man, but tragic hero he is. Popular songs on Eddie. Eddie Walker, Eddie the Eunuch, a song by Asylone, explicit, Nice Guy Eddie, Spanish Eddie, Eddie You Should Know Better, a song by the Chordettes, a song by Deanna Carter, a song by the Bobs, a song by the Stray Cats, a song by Ween, explicit, Eddie My Love, Eddie, a song by The Sleeper, A Tear for Eddie, Eddie the Jinx, Weird Al Yankovic, a song by Chris Christopherson, a song by Ben Folds 5, a song by Curtis Mayfield, a song by Laura Branigan. My Baby's in Love with Eddie Vedder, Cornbread, Eddie and Me Jean. And Eddie. Famous people named Eddie. Eddie Jones, basketball player, Eddie Money, musician, Eddie Vedder, musician, Eddie Ikaw, surfer, Eddie Rickenbacker, World War I hero, pilot, Eddie Van Halen, guitarist/musician, Eddie Cheever, race car driver, Eddie Murphy, comic/actor, Eddie Guardado, baseball player. Historic figures with the name Eddie. Born Edward Rickenbacker in Columbus, Ohio on October 8, 1890, Eddie Rickenbacker was already an accomplished race car driver when World War I started. He was born to German-speaking Swiss parents and changed his Auroi to Germana Euro sounding name from Rickenbacker to Rickenbacker amidst anti-German sentiment running high in America during the Great War. Called to defend his country in a time of war, Eddie joined the United States Army Air Force. He became a distinguished flying ace fighter pilot and won an impressive 26 air victories, as well as other distinctions, which would earn him the Medal of Honor. He is also known as the President of Eastern Airlines, a position he held between 1938 and 1963. Race car driver, war hero, accomplished businessman. This Eddie was one remarkable, fearless, unstoppable dude.